Hello, everyone. It's Adam Caplan here for Inside the Birds coverage of the 2023 NFL Draft. With me today is the great Andrew DiCecco, and we are presented by Ocean Casino Resort. So, Andrew, the draft ended right on the nose at 7 p.m. Eastern, so it is now behind us. Andrew, how do you feel? Because you don't just cover the Eagles. You're an observer of the entire league. So, of all the craziness of this NFL draft, what do you think of it all?
Man, it never ceases to amaze me, Adam. Just the 3 days of madness. You see a lot of you see all these different mock drafts and all the speculation and rumors, and a lot of it never comes to fruition. But it was just a really eventful and hectic 3 days, as I'm sure you can attest to. But a lot of fun, and a lot of things that I didn't even expect.
Let me ask you a question. When you go, a lot of rumors and a lot of things that didn't happen, could you kind of expand on that? Because there's so much stuff that gets out there. You and I do mock drafts. In fact, it's the first one I've done since probably 2009. Did it for Pro Football Network. And I kind of laughed. I'm like, I know like 90% of this is going to be wrong. And the ones I got right were like so ridiculous. Like I got Skronsky right to the Titans. And I got a couple in the 20s right. But it's so random, Andrew. With all the speculation out there, how do you sift through all of it?
Well, it's tough. As you know, Adam, you have to talk to a lot of people and not just one person, but you got to vet it through three different people at least and kind of gauge where teams are at. I mean, the quarterback thing, look at Anthony Richardson. As we got closer to the draft, I thought that he was going to go four.
Did you?
I thought there was a distinct possibility. I even mentioned that on 97.3 when I was on Thursday. But I mean, that you see mock drafts having him go late. Will Levis going above him. Will Levis didn't go until day two. You see a guy like Will McDonald go in the top half of the first round. I personally didn't even have him slotted until later in the first round. At the highest, I had it maybe a top end of the second round. So it all depends on what teams think. It's all in the eye of the beholder. There, Emmanuel Forbes going before Christian Gonzalez. I don't think anybody foresaw that. So there was just a number of things that I was just my mind was blown in that first round. I couldn't wrap my head around some of it.
All right. So with that, when we turn our attention to the Eagles, they started the draft with 6 picks. Shocker, they only kept one of those 6 picks, but they wound up by maneuvering and trades. They actually wound up with 7 draft picks total. But again, the original 6 picks, they only kept one of them. And that was the second pick in the first round that they had. But they did add a running back in DeAndre Swift. So I'll just give you an overview. This came about in the last 48 hours, as I understand it. The Lions, once they made their shocking pick, by the way, I gotta go to you right now before we come back to Swift. Jahmyr Gibbs is a talented player. Okay, he should have gone in the first round. But you've watched this tape, you've seen this player. How do you expect him to be used to warrant this pick at 12 overall?
That was a head scratcher. I had him going late, maybe even to 30, for the Eagles, as I'm sure a lot of people did. Going at 12, my mind was blown on that because he's an explosive player. He's a game changer on offense, but he's not a volume runner. As we all know, he doesn't have the size for that. So how can you justify, regardless of how explosive a talent he is, how can you certainly justify taking someone as if he's a blue chip player? I mean, maybe they view him that way, but he's not going to be a bell cow running back like a Bijan Robinson. So I thought taking him there was extremely rich.
Yeah, in fact, that's a term that someone else gave me, Rich. That's a funny. It's a scouting term. I don't use that very much, but I think it really explains that's a little bit too much to draft for. The guy should have probably gone later. Because look, it's one thing Bijan Robinson at 8. Our feeling going into the draft is that would be earliest he would go to Atlanta. That happened, but he's an every down back. Gibbs is just not big enough physically to be that guy. Yeah, you could use him. These Bill Parcells used to call these backs satellite backs. Guys are smaller like Gibbs, but certainly you could spread them out and put them in the slot and so forth. So that certainly was a surprise. And then the other one, very minor note, they did they waived Marvin Wilson, who's a backup defensive tackle who they would have loved to have brought to training camp. He still could, but right now he's off the roster. He's subject to waivers. But the big one is to getting DeAndre Swift. So let's start with him before we get into the selections and our thoughts on this. They certainly had room for one more running back. They needed to add one more guy by training camp, and obviously they did, and this is a big move. How do you see his fit here with the Eagles?
Well, here's the thing, Adam. On day 3, they still needed a running back, and the likelihood of finding a starting running back or someone that can shoulder the lion's share of the carries today isn't very likely, especially when you're coupling that with someone like Rashad Penny, who has an extensive injury history, I think that putting all your eggs in that basket and then banking on maybe a day 3 running back to supplement what you already have might be considered malpractice. Now, they got a player in DeAndre Swift, who, and I got to tell you, in all my, the last few years of scouting, he's one of my favorite running backs that I ever have scouted. I just think he's an explosive weapon, good pass catcher, has a really good feel for the running game, good vision, can take it the distance at any point on the field. Now, the issues with him has been staying on the field. And I think having him in Philadelphia behind that offensive line in a running back rotation that features Penny, Gainwell, Boston Scott, perhaps, maybe even Trey Sermon, it's going to allow him to remain fresh, preserve his health, and hopefully it can accentuate what he does well. And there's a lot of things that he does do well.
So when you look at Swift, now he's not tall. He's between 5'8" and 5'9", but he doesn't, it's funny, he doesn't play like he's solidly built, but he's got bulk to him. So we've got Gainwell, Boston Scott, Penny, who you mentioned, Trey Sermon, Kennedy Brooks. Yeah, he's technically on the roster, but he certainly will not be with the team this fall in terms of the active roster, 53-man roster. So let's talk about here what the rotation, Andrew, how do you see that going here potentially for the season?
Well, Rashad Penny to me is the big wild card here, right? Because I think that he's someone that now could have 700 yards, or he can be somebody that if he gets banged up throughout the summer, kind of like Kerryon Johnson a couple of years ago, they might part ways with him, because that could be a precursor of what's to come. I think that DeAndre Swift projects as the early down player, somebody that they're going to look to feature. I don't know that he's going to get 15, 18 carries a game. I don't think that that's really what he's equipped to do. But then I also think you may see series where Kenny Gainwell takes a series and things like that. I think there's going to be a running back by committee. Obviously, under the Nick Sirianni regime, there hasn't been a whole lot of consistency as far as the rotation goes. You see Boston Scott get inserted at random points of the game and things like that. But I do think that when you're getting somebody like a DeAndre Swift on your roster who has the potential to be just a home run hitter anytime he touches the ball, you have to make sure that you get him at least 12 touches a game somehow, because he's also somebody that can catch the football extremely well and very deadly in space.
And by the way, this is the final year of DeAndre Swift, who's, by the way, from Philadelphia. This is the final year of his rookie deal. Oh, by the way, he went to Georgia. We're going to get to that stuff. My mind's blown with this University of Georgia stuff. They ignored it for years, and then all of a sudden it's OD on Georgia. But Georgia's on Howie's mind. He's on the final year of his rookie deal. The guaranteed money in his contract expired after last season. His final year here of base salary, this plays into what you're talking about, $1.75 million non-guaranteed. Obviously, he could be their lead back. Now, barring something highly unforeseen, like he just has a terrible training camp, he's going to be heavily involved this season. But here's my issue. You've got this guy who's missed significant time. They were frustrated with him. The Lions were, because his inability to stay healthy. Rashad Penny, who you mentioned, significant injury history. Trey Sermon, totally unproven. Yes, he had a good fall for them, the Eagles did, in terms of practice time, but we still don't know much about him. Boston Scott just has this role, which could be he doesn't get a touch for 5 games, and he could be the guy one game. Who knows? Kenny Gainwell. This obviously usurps his passing down role. Gainwell was their third down back more or less last season. Swift should at least be that. Am I seeing this right? I mean, I'm just trying to figure out what's first and second down going to look like.
I think that if I had to guess, DeAndre Swift would get the ball on first and second down. But you're right. As great of a trade as this is, and how it alters the dimension of and adds another dimension to the offense, the other side of that coin, as you alluded to already, there are significant injury history pertaining to the two lead backs. The two projected lead backs in Penny and Swift, and then you have a couple of complementary running backs in Gainwell and Boston Scott. And you mentioned Trey Sermon, who is largely a mystery. If he works out, that's a bonus. So I think that having some amalgamation of these guys and finding different roles for them is going to serve the offense well, because I don't know that any of those guys are equipped to really shoulder a heavy load.
And by the way, the trade we should mention. Now, the potential hang up, I know teams did not want to no one wanted to give up a 2024 next year's 4th round pick. So the Eagles and the Lions, of the teams that called, they were able to reach a sort of a dividing line here. Okay, well, the Eagles had to give up a pick, and it was a 4th round in 2025. and then they swapped seventh, where the Lions moved up from 249 to 219, which moves up 30 spots. It's only seventh rounder. But the big thing from an Eagle standpoint is because they had given up a bunch of picks for next year, because they started with roughly 12. They're thinking they're going to have 12 next year. They thought they were, but then they made all these trades today. So they were able to preserve any kind of pick for next year, mid-round pick. And that to me was the line of demarcation. Like, they didn't want to do that. And good for them, because again, DeAndre Swift now is on the final year of his deal. And, if he gets hurt, unfortunately, which he tends to do, and I don't know what it is about him, why he gets hurt. He's had some shoulder problems, some knee problems, lower body injury problems. And remember, by the way, he was coach for 2 seasons with Deuce Staley in Detroit. Deuce is now in Carolina. He was coaching Miles Sanders again, which is interesting. So that's the breakdown of the running back situation. But let's get into, Andrew, the 7 picks. Now, we'll do an overview at the end here, but I do want to go over today's picks because they did have 3. Kelee Ringo, we'll get into him in a second, and the Eagles, I could tell you, had a higher grade on him than most teams we spoke with, but they liked him. They made the trade to get up there. Tanner McKee and Moro Ojomo. So let's start with Ringo here. What are your thoughts on him from Georgia?
Well, I had a high second round grade on him, Adam, and I really like his size at 6'2", 205. He's good. He's very fast linearly. I think moving laterally, I think that's where his hiccup really is. And I think sometimes when things break down for him, it's technique, and guys can get a step on him down the field. And I think he can get a little grabby at times. But I think that he's very physical against the run. He's willing. He has the size that I think lends itself to maybe cross training at safety. The Eagles like their versatility in the defensive backfield. Look at Avonte Maddox. You look at Josiah Scott. It's just right down the line. They like versatility. I think he provides that. He's only 20 years old and is extremely athletic and intriguing. And I think when you see somebody like that and you bring him in and you know that he can sit behind starters like Darius Slay and James Bradbury and really learn the game. So when he's asked to step in there, when he has to, some of those finer nuances are refined, and he's able to step in there and be he's an immensely talented player. I just think that he's a little bit raw, but getting him in the 4th round is just an incredible value.
Which is why they made that move. And yeah, his combine measurement, 6'1" and 3/4, so he's just under 6'2", which is really long. 207, 31 and 1/4 arms. That's I'm told that's above average. Wingspan of 74 and 1/8. The really good part here, and look, because I'm going to explain this. I think this is what you're talking about. His straight line speed was great, 4.36. His 10-yard split was very good at 1.54. But the way that I've heard it is he doesn't play to that speed. In fact, there's some lower body stiffness, which is what teams had an issue with. Why teams gave him generally 3rd round grades, some 4th. Now the Eagles had a higher grade, as we understand, than most teams. In fact, Howie Roseman said that the value was the reason why they made the move there. So look, Andrew, you know it. Everybody knows it. The Eagles don't have a future at outside corner. They don't. They've got 2 veterans who are kind of locked into 2 seasons to be the starters, but it doesn't mean, as we've said on Inside the Birds last couple of weeks, doesn't mean they can't draft somebody in year 2 who could start cutting into that playing time. And who knows? He's asking 2 older corners to stay healthy for 2 seasons. I mean, you're rolling the dice there. And of course, they've got Greedy Williams. But I like the move. Now, let me ask you this question. They didn't have a 5th round pick. My thinking coming into the draft was maybe they would draft a quarterback. What were your thoughts on McKee here from Stanford? And did you think they needed to add somebody?
Yes, I think so. Just to challenge Ian Book in training camp. And I even thought that in the 7th round, they might want to look into a Malik Cunningham. He ended up going undrafted, but I thought that he has – you know how it goes, Adam. In the 7th round, it's all about dart throws, and he's just such an athletic talent that I think showed some translatable traits. And I thought it would be really, really interesting to see what he could do with Alex Tanney and Brian Johnson really working with him over the summer. But McKee, he's 6'6", 230. He's a classic pocket passer. He throws a lot of velocity, has a big arm, trusts his receivers a lot. He's not afraid to fit the ball in tight windows. Just is a statue back there. He doesn't offer any sort of mobility, which I think is interesting when you look at Jalen Hurts and Marcus Mariota. McKee provides a little bit more diversification to the quarterback room. and I just think he's not an anticipatory thrower. I don't know that he throws with a lot of touch either. So I think those are some of the reasons why he was drafted where he was. But I think from an arm talent standpoint, I mean, he is more gifted as a passer than Ian Book is. I'm just interested to see if he's able to pick up the system. Remember, Ian Book has a year already there. If he's able to get up to speed in time to really push for that third spot in training camp.
All right, and now in round 7, their last pick, defensive tackle Moro Ojomo from Texas, who seems to be a scheme fit for an odd man front. That was my first thought. What are your thoughts on this kid?
Yeah, Moro Ojomo, I'm surprised that he lasted as long as he did. I think his size and sort of his tweener build is what led to his fall, because he's 6'3", it goes about 292. To me, his skills would seem to indicate that he's going to find a home on the inside.
Yeah.
He's a very powerful lineman, and I think that his play strength is really one of the hallmarks of his game. Isn't going to be someone that tallies up the sacks or anything like that. He only had 3 last year, but he's someone that could plug the run adequately. And I think that he started 30 games, played in 50 games at Texas, really long arms, over 34 inches. So there's a lot to like there. Now the Eagles have such an embarrassment of riches there all of a sudden, Adam, along the trenches, that you just wonder what's his pathway to the roster. I mean, he's going to have to challenge Contavious Street, I would think, for a final spot, or Marlon Tuipulotu.
Do you see him as a 3 technique, 5 nose? Where do you see him lining up?
I see him as a 3. Right. That's sort of how I view him right now. I'm interested to see how the Eagles view him, because he's in an awkward size right now, but I think that he can do a multitude of different things. One of his great appeals is that he is scheme versatile. He does have provide multiple alignment versatility there. So we'll see what they do.
All right, you're watching our post-draft coverage here on Inside the Birds, presented by Ocean Casino Resort in Atlantic City. So, Andrew, okay, so we just went over today's picks. Let's get back to the first 2 days, and so fascinating. The Eagles clearly like the Georgia program. They have a very good relationship with Kirby Smart, the head coach. They interviewed Glenn Schumann to be their defensive coordinator that went to Sean Desai. And it's really crazy the intel that they have on the school. All of a sudden, the last 2 seasons, I don't want to say out of the blue, but it's not like they've drafted a lot of Georgia players over the years under Howie Roseman. But look, they got Jalen Carter. Yeah, they got Carter, right? You know, the movie Get Carter.
Get Carter, Sylvester Stallone.
There you go. So they got Jalen at number 9. They did trade up 1. They only had to give up a 4th-round pick for next year from Chicago. You've seen Jalen Carter. You and I haven't spoken here. I know Mosher and Cosell did that show. They were able to talk. But what are your first thoughts on Carter here with the Eagles?
I was a little surprised that he was available at 9. I thought he was going to go 5 to Seattle. But as soon as I saw that little tumble, I knew he was within striking distance. When the Eagles moved up, obviously it was for him. They prioritized the trenches, and there's not many blemishes to his game, Adam. He was top-rated prospect on my board. Obviously, he came with his off-the-field transgressions, but pushing that aside, I mean, you're getting a player that not only affects the defensive line, open things up for Josh Sweat, Hassan Reddick, and the like, but it also affects all 3 levels because of what he's able to do. He's an interior mover. He moves guys around. His lateral quickness is exceptional, and his hand usage is advanced. And I just think he's a day 1 starter, and he just opened things up for everyone else. And he's going to be the face of your defense, at least in the trenches, for the next 10, 12 years.
So they draft Carter. They've got their 3 technique. Obviously, they got to get through his off the field stuff. Geoff and I will talk about that for our Monday show, but let's just stick to football right now. So, and the roster. So they've got that guy there. And then this one, to me, I've heard everything. Geoff and I have dug on this one. I don't know what you've heard when we get into what you think on Nolan Smith, but I've not got a legitimate excuse why he dropped to them at 30. What are your thoughts on, okay, A, why he dropped, and B, how he fits in here?
Well, first I'll say that Nolan Smith was probably my favorite pick that the Eagles had, and I think the reason why he fell, I thought they were going to take him at 10 if they stayed there, and the board fell a certain way. I thought that they were going to feel pretty comfortable taking him there. So to get him at 30 was like highway robbery. But to answer your question, Adam, I think the reason why he dropped as far as he did, the only thing I can think of is his size and how teams see his fit in their defense. there's a lot of question marks there, and I think that he fell kind of, we mentioned Ojomo, he kind of fell in that tweener role where teams maybe didn't know exactly what to do with him. But leave it to the Eagles. They're going to find a way to utilize him and accentuate his skill set. He's there with a bunch of his Georgia teammates. His leadership really jumped out to me when I heard him speak yesterday. His enthusiasm, his dedication to his craft. It's nothing new. This is who, if you've ever heard any of his pressers or hear him talk or anything like that, this is who he's been during his entire time in Georgia. Really, he's going to be a great teammate, an instant fan favorite, and somebody that I think can provide some heat off the edge there from the get go.
I mean, think about it, right? You just talk about the heat off the edge with Reddick. Not that the kid Taylor is going to play a whole lot. The kid that they drafted last year, the DN out of Kansas.
No, Kyron
Johnson. Sorry, Kyron Johnson. But you just talk about the speed, and then you got the power of Josh Sweat and BG, of course, and Cox and Carter inside with Jordan Davis. This is a heck of a front seven. If Carter does what he's supposed to do, Andrew, right away, like that, obviously he needs to make sure everybody needs to make sure that they got him in good shape, and obviously Jordan Davis. Although I'm told Davis showed up to the offseason program in pretty good shape, but we'll see how the stamina is and all that. This rotation, Andrew, which we weren't sure to start free agency what it's going to look like after they lost Hargrave. What are your thoughts on this thing? Could it look as, I mean, at least on paper it sounds good, but what do you think it looks like?
Yeah, well, first of all, that's why I always caution folks to always relax. You can't base an offseason off the first 2 weeks of training camp. You still have the draft and the latter stage of free agency to go. And
sure,
it also, obviously, the landscape is drastically altered with some key additions here in the draft. And right now, I mean, you have a healthy rotation. We have not even mentioned Milton Williams. Yeah. I think Contavious Street can be a player that steps in a minor role there and contribute. So, I mean, they're going to have a strong rotation. It's going to alleviate some of the pressure on the back end. And if these guys are able to stay healthy, they're definitely going to shatter the sack record that they came so close to eclipsing last season.
So then they move on to the third round, their last two picks of day number 2, and they take a guy who played tackle at Alabama and Tyler Steen, who's going to move inside because he's one of those rare guys, Andrew. If a guy's 6'6", you're thinking he's got at least maybe 33 and a half at a minimum inch arms, or 34 at the very least. And nope, he's actually in the 32 plus range. So just too short of arms to play left tackle. He's going to move inside a guard. So what are your first thoughts on this kid, Tyler Steen?
Well, he has a unique build, right? Because his arms aren't he has short arms, being 6'6", so you don't necessarily usually see that type of pairing. But as it were, this is a guy that played left tackle for Alabama, right? And he caught their eye at the Senior Bowl, and I think that he can actually challenge Cam Jurgens in training camp legitimately to be their right guard week 1. I think he's that good. There's some things there with his footwork, and I think and certain nuances to the position that I think he needs to iron out. But leave it to Jeff Stoutland to get that out of him. I think that you're going to see a player that you might surprise in training camp. I think he's going to be someone that makes some noise and possibly even slotted to start at right guard week 1.
Yeah, he's got two positives that he had. He had a good bench of over 30, actually 31 at the combine, and his hands are over 10. In fact, I think they're 10 and a half, which is good. But as you talked about, the wing size and the arm length is just not ideal. So he's going to move inside. And then this is the one that we had said on Inside the Berth in our pre-draft show. This is a guy the Eagles really like. If it's going to be one of the safeties they target, it would be this guy, Sidney Brown, out of Illinois. Now, not only did the Eagles have a higher grade, I talked to teams who had a second-round grade in this kid. Why would he go? I'm kind of surprised. Did you think he'd go higher?
I had him going 62 in the mock that we did, and even like the second edition. But even there, I wasn't even sure that he was going to get there because I mean, a physical player. You want to talk about somebody that's a tone setter back there, versatile player, not necessarily that tall or that long of a player, but this is a guy that drew comparisons from his own head coach at Illinois to the great Bob Sanders, one of my all-time favorite players. That's high praise, but I mean, there's not a lot that he can't do. I think some of his he needs to become more of a sure tackler, but that's also the nature in the way that he plays the game. He's a very physical player. He hits anything that moves, and he offers scheme versatility. So like he's a really smart player. They called him, what they call him, a red dot player. Is that what Howie called him, I believe?
Yeah, what happened was this term basically, and it would go back to Andre Maddox back in 18. The entire scouting staff, everyone, the general manager, the personnel directors, the area scout, everyone who put eyes on him. Let's say 8 players gave a draft grade. They all wanted Maddox, Andre Maddox. So it's just one of Avonte Maddox, excuse me. It's one of those guys where and they all agreed. And by the way, Maddox has been good. Now, he also really liked Zach McPherson, not quite to that degree. And he was a 4th rounder as well. He hasn't quite panned out. And the whole scouting department love this kid. So yeah, look, you talk to people around the league, they all love this player, a tone setter, built very, very compact and strong, smart, really good range. This is a Eagles type pick here that they loved. And now here's my next question and a thought here. They have players now. Edmonds and Evans are on 1-year deals, but again, the draft is more about the future. That doesn't mean he can't start this year. You got Blankenship. Would you expect Sidney Brown to start? Let's put it back to you, man. Do you think he'll start this season?
I do, and we're talking about this here in late April, but Adam, I do think he can start. He's a highly intelligent player, extremely physical. I think he's going to grasp the system pretty early on. And I think that he could do a lot of different things to provide some flexibility and optionality for Sean Desai that some of those other players that we mentioned can't. And I think you're going to see him align alongside Terrell Edmonds. And I think Blankenship is going to be a high end 3, which is really what he is. That's what his skill set really is going to allow him to do. But I think he can step in sub packages and contribute in his own way. But yes, I do think Sidney Brown's going to be a week 1 starter if I had to guess right now.
Okay. Before we get out of here, so we've done this overview of their picks and fits and so forth. Is there anything when you look back and say, gosh, I wish they would have done this? Was there anything left over where you go, wow, they left a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth because they didn't address this position?
Well, going into today, outside corner for me was a position that I was like, man, trying to bank on somebody you're going to get in the 6 rounds is an awfully dicey proposition because you're putting all your eggs in the Greedy Williams basket and you're hoping that Zach McPherson can step in there as well. And now I view McPherson more as a nickel player. So when you look at that, you don't have a lot of enticing options or ones that you can feel overly confident in to step in should Slayer Bradbury miss time. So I thought they really needed to get one, and they got one. As soon as they traded up, I said Ringo, he's the best player on the board. They got one, 6'2", great length, and he can step right in and be a perimeter player. You hope he doesn't have to step in too early, Adam, because I think that at being 20 years old and having to really master the position, you really want to see him marinate, in the shadows a little bit and learn from those guys. But they pretty much knocked everything out of the park. I think it's an A+ draft.
No, I agree with you. Great thoughts from you, Andrew. And what do we have at the website? What do you got coming up for us, or what have you written for us lately?
Well, I'm going to be covering the undrafted free agents, and I wrote something on Nolan Smith and Jalen Carter, based on just like the brotherhood that comes out of Georgia, and how I thought Nolan Smith really came off as very mature, and his leadership really shined through in the presser, and how he had his back. I thought, and I'll be covering the undrafted free agents and giving my thoughts on that as well.
Okay, and remember, you'll see some reports out there. Usually 1 or 2 of them are not correct, where the player didn't sign, he gets a better deal elsewhere, they back out, whatever the case may be. It happens. It is what it is, because they're only agreements. They're not official until they're signed. But we'll cover them. Andrew will cover them. Our next show on Inside the Birds will debut Monday morning, 6 a.m. Eastern, on all of our platforms. And then after our usual show on Monday morning, we're going to cover a ton of stuff from this draft and other issues. We're going to have our final Intel with Greg Cosell show. It'll either drop Tuesday or Wednesday. We haven't decided yet, but we have to talk to Greg about when we're going to tape it. But we cannot wait to talk to him and talk about everything, and also his thoughts with some other players from around the NFL about where they went and so forth. So for Andrew DiCecco, I'm Adam Caplan. We'll see you on Monday on Inside the Birds.